Shabbat Shalom. So this morning we read the special maftir for Shabbat Zachor, which is the Shabbat before Purim, and it is considered the only Torah reading that is halachically incumbent for every Jew to hear. Right, I mean, the congregation has the obligation to read the Torah, assuming there's a minyan, right? But if you happen not to be in shul that day, so you don't hear the Torah reading, not a big deal. I mean, you haven't, you have to daven still if you aren't in shul, but you don't have to hear the Torah read. But it is considered that you have to hear Zachor read. Why? Because it's part of the mitzvah of Zachor, right? Zachor et asher asalaha Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you. Right now, it's a very paradoxical mitzvah because that's the first verse of the 3-verse maftir, and then the last verse says, we have to erase all memory of Amalek, lo tishka, don't forget, right? How are you supposed to erase all memory if you don't forget, right? I mean, so I spoke about that last night, I'm not gonna repeat myself, right? I resolved that issue last night, right? But I didn't resolve it, but, you have to hear Zachor read, and in the Orthodox shul where I went when I lived in Baltimore, I remember there was this one guy who made a very big show of making sure that he actually heard the reading. So his normal seat was toward the back. He would go up to the front of the shul and he'd go like this, okay? A kind of performative religiosity that I personally do not care, right? But there are, all these urban legends, because what's the proper pronunciation of Hebrew, right? Is it Ashkenaz or Sephard? Okay, and then you say, okay, Ashkenaz, they're what? Polish, Lithuanian, Hungarian, German, right? Okay, so maybe Sfarad. Okay. Yemenite, Moroccan, Iraqi, Syrian, Turkish, right? There's, endless variations of pronunciation, right? So there's all these urban legends of these shuls in Jerusalem where they read this 30 times in 30 different pronunciations to make sure that you actually fulfill the mitzvah, right? Because if you hear it read in the wrong pronunciation, that would really fulfill, right? So, that's just an aside, okay? I'm lucky to get through it once in my own, Brooklyn, New Jersey, Ashkefardi pronunciation, right? But the fact that we read this is a blessing in a way to rabbis, because we have several parshiot that describe the construction of the tabernacle. I am neither an engineer nor an architect nor an interior decorator, right? And so it's a relief to speak about something different and still be like on topic this morning, right? And so as I said last night, a lot of rabbis will talk about the mitzvah to eradicate Amalek, and they'll say, today's Amalek is Hamas, or today's Amalek is Hezbollah, or, and believe me, eradicating Hamas and Hezbollah it, it's not maybe a mitzvah in the literal halachic sense, but it's certainly a mitzvah in the colloquial sense. I have no problem with that, but halachically, you can't just label someone or something as Amalek, right? Halachically, there are no more Amalekites. Why? Because when the Assyrians conquered territory, what did they do? And we know this, right? They deported people to other parts of their empire, ethnic cleansing, if you will, right? And that's why we have the 10 lost tribes, because when they conquered northern Israel, they moved the Israelites out and they moved other people in, and that's how we have the Samaritans, and it's an interesting history, but again, for another time, right? So there are no more Amalekites, and the mitzvah is there are no more Amalekites. If there were, we would have to eradicate them. And interestingly, when I was the Hillel director at American University, it was automatic that your email address was the initial of your first name plus your last name, automatic. Okay, so my email address was Carian, C-Arian, at american.edu, but there was a guy who worked in the computing center whose name, I swear I'm not making this up, was Abbas Malek, and therefore his email address was Amalek at american.edu, right? And the question is, what did I have a mitzvah to send him malware by email, right? Guess that was Amalek, right? But the question is, what do we do with this reading? Okay, and so here I want to give a different perspective that I learned from the late Rabbi Jack Bloom, who was a friend of mine, not a close friend, but a friend. And, you know, once you knew him, you got a Rosh Hashanah card from him every year. And they were always interesting, but Rabbi Bloom was both a rabbi and a psychotherapist. And in his discussion, he called it Amalek and Us, he makes a distinction between either or thinking and relational thinking, right? I mean, I talk about binaries, but it's really kind of the same thing, right? I mean, where, you know, either or, right? If Judaism is true, then all other religions are false, right? Beyond that, if conservative Judaism is true, all other types of Judaism are false, right? And if, you know, I mean, you take it to any sort of endeavor, whereas, no, if you're talking about relational thinking, they're just different aspects of a larger whole. But Rabbi Bloom points out that the Hebrew text is more ambiguous than most of the translation, right? And you've heard me speak about this before, how we solve textual difficulties by mistranslation, right? So it says that Amalek attacked the rear and the stragglers, and then the Hebrew is ve'ata ayef v'yagea v'lo yareh Elohim. Okay, ata ayef v'yagea v'lo yareh Elohim. If you want to translate that word for word, you are or were tired and weary and did not fear God. You were tired and weary and did not fear God. Right? That's the literal translation. Right? Now, translations assume that we were tired and weary, and the Amalekites did not fear God, right? But that's not actually what the text said. It says, we were tired and weary and did not fear God, right? And what does that mean? Okay, so who are the classic example in the Torah of non-Israelites who did fear God?
Philistines. The Philistines.
The-
Philistines.
They feared God?
After the Dagon was like taken down, they were following.
Okay, so then they feared God, right? But, yeah,
One would be, Yitro or, well, several names are given to it, but, one was his father-in-law.
right, okay, Yitro, right, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, but I could be wrong, but I'm not aware of any place where it says specifically he feared God. Okay, so go back in the same book in Exodus a little bit earlier, yeah.
I was gonna say, one of Abraham's opponents.
Okay, but now you went back too far.
Right.
Okay, yeah. That was Abraham's father. Yeah. All right, so Shiphrah and Puah, the Egyptian midwives, right? It says specifically that Pharaoh told them to kill every firstborn male Hebrew child, but the midwives feared God, right? Yaru Elohim, they feared God and didn't do what Pharaoh told them to do, right? Civil disobedience, if you will, right? Shiphrah and Puah understood that I was just following orders. No, it doesn't wash, right? I mean, we established that in Nuremberg, but Shiphrah and Puah knew that centuries before, right? Pharaoh tells you to do something wrong and immoral and evil. Does that mean you have to do something wrong and immoral and evil? No, right? Because who's higher than Pharaoh? God, right? And your responsibility is not to Pharaoh, it's to God, right? And so fearing God means to transcend differences of religion or class or language or color and see the essential humanity in each person, right? Which is precisely what Amalek didn't do, right? They killed who? The weak, the children, and the elderly, right? And this is the classic definition of terrorism, okay? And I have to say, you know, as somebody who has an undergraduate degree in international relations, that when we talk about terrorists killing soldiers, drives me nuts, right? Attacking a military target is not terrorism. By definition, I'm not saying it's good or righteous or justified or acceptable, but by definition, it's not terrorism, right? But attacking civilian targets, that's terrorism, right? And if the Amalekites had attacked the Israelite fighters, that's war, that's military, that's normal, right? But when you attack children and the elderly, that's terrorism. And it's just killing them because they're others, right? And this is the classic definition of, it's not even collateral damage. It's not like they attacked the army and women and children also got killed, right? That happens too, but that's collateral damage, and by the laws of war, it's understood that that happens. You're supposed to try and minimize it, but you will never prevent it 100%. But the women and children that Amalek attacked were not collateral damage, right? The Amalek attacked them, but if you understand Rabbi Bloom's way of reading the text, that Lo Yareh Elohim, did not fear God, talks about not only the Amalekites, or maybe not even the Amalekites, but about us, right? Because how were the women and children and the elderly able to be killed? Because we didn't protect them, right? We didn't protect them, right? And if you look at the failures of October 7th, right? The primary responsibility of a government is to protect its people, right? And that's what the current government, which refuses to accept any responsibility and refuses to allow a commission of inquiry, but that's what they didn't do. And I could talk about the reasons why they didn't do it, but they didn't do it, right? And why were the elderly and the children not protected from the Amalekites? What military value do they have, right? They're stragglers, right? Who really needs them? And then the text goes on to say, God has a war with Amalek throughout all generations, right? And what does that mean? Amalek is the classic depersonalizer, that you look at another person and you don't see them as a person, you see them as expendable, right? And to treat people as expendable is to commit the sin of Amalek, right? And, you know, I have to tell you, talking very, very personally, okay, one of the most hurtful things that ever happened to me was when, in my previous congregation, the board decided not to renew my contract, and I can talk about why and how that was done, and the fact that they called a snap meeting when two members of the board who supported me were out of the country, and the whole everything. But that's not what bothered me. Okay, when the then president of the shul sent an email letting people know, it simply said, the rabbi's contract was not renewed. Okay, and I got so angry because I said, you didn't thank me for my service, you didn't wish me well, you didn't even mention my name. It was like I was a sofa that was worn out and being replaced, right? And look, in retrospect, I'm very glad that they didn't renew my contract, because I'm much better off here than I was there, okay? But I didn't know that at the time, but that's not the point. I understand that nobody is guaranteed a job, right? And the people who are losing their jobs now, also, nobody is guaranteed a job. But when you say, I want people to suffer, right? These people are, right, they don't, right, people who served our country in the military and then in the civ, and, oh, they don't deserve jobs, right? I mean, do what you need to do, but treat people as human beings. Right? Treat people as human beings, not as widgets that can just be thrown away. Right? And when we treat other people as if they don't matter because they don't serve our ends, they don't meet our needs, that, according to Rabbi Bloom's reading of the text, is to commit the sin of Amalek, and this is a sin that all of us are capable of, right? We have to, and what is the central teaching of Judaism? The central teaching of Judaism is that each person is nivra b'tselem. Right? Each person is created in the image of God. Each person is holy. When we see people as expendable, when we see people as others, and we don't respect the image of God in each person, that's when we commit the sin of the Amalekites. Shabbat Shalom. And we continue with the Kaddish before Musaf and the Musaf service, page 150.